The words came out wrong the moment she said them. "I've been aching down there," she whispered, barely louder than the wind moving through the grass. Ethan Parker froze behind her, not because of what she meant, but because of how it would sound to anyone watching from the road. His hand loosened on the torn fabric at her side, and for half a second he felt the weight of every bad assumption a stranger could make. "Easy now," he said quietly, the way a man talked to a scared animal. "Don't move yet. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below." She swallowed and lifted a shaking finger, pointing to the side of her hip. "Right here," she added. "It hurts bad." That was when the picture changed. That was when the truth settled into place. This wasn't a man taking advantage of a helpless young woman. This was a rancher trying to keep someone from bleeding into the dirt. Emily Whitman was 23 years old, fresh off a stagecoach, and less than an hour after arriving at Ethan's ranch, she had gone down hard against his fence. The way she fell bothered him more than the blood. The Arizona sun pressed down without mercy. Summer out here didn't care about apologies. The ground was packed hard, the grass dry enough to cut skin, and the barbed wire fence stretched on like it never planned to end. Emily had wanted to help. That had been her first mistake. She had insisted on walking the fence line with him, saying she didn't cross half a country to sit inside and wait to be told where to stand. She walked a few steps ahead, boots still new, eyes not trained yet for the small dangers a lifetime on this land taught you to notice. Then her foot caught, not on a rock, not on loose dirt, on wire pulled tighter than the rest. She went down fast, twisting as the barbs tore cloth and skin. Her hips slammed into the earth with a sound that made Ethan curse under his breath. Now she knelt there shaking, pain burning deep where it didn't show right away. That kind of pain stayed with you. Ethan checked her the only way he knew how. Slow hands. No rush. No nonsense. The dress was ripped clean along the seam. The skin beneath was already swelling, darkening under his fingers. A bad bruise if they were lucky. Something worse if they weren't. He reached out to steady her, and that was the moment anyone watching could have misunderstood everything. And someone had been watching. Ethan felt it before he saw it. That tight feeling between the shoulders that didn't come from heat or age. He glanced down the fence line toward the open land beyond his property. Nothing moved. No rider. No dust. But the wire told a different story. This section didn't match the rest. The tension was wrong. Too tight. And there, half hidden in the grass, was a fresh knot where the wire had been joined. Careless. New. His jaw tightened. This hadn't been an accident. He eased Emily away from the fence and helped her sit back. "Stay still," he said. "I'll get water." She nodded, teeth clenched. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Ethan looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't dressed like someone chasing trouble. She looked like someone who had trusted too much and landed in a place that didn't forgive easily. "You didn't cause this," he said. "Someone else did." When he brought the canteen back, her hands shook so badly water spilled down her chin. That was when he noticed the scrap of cloth caught on the barb. Darker, heavier, not hers, the kind men wore. He slipped it free and folded it into his palm without a word. Out here, people didn't usually set traps for women. They set them to send messages. And this one had been aimed straight at him. Ethan didn't rush her back toward the house. He knew better. A hard fall to the hip could turn worse if you pushed it, and panic had a way of making pain louder. He walked beside her instead, slow enough that every step felt chosen. Emily leaned on him without meaning to at first. Then she noticed and tried to pull away, straightening her back like she could will the pain out of her body. "I'm fine," she said, even though her voice gave her away. He didn't argue. Arguing never helped. He just adjusted his pace, so she didn't have to fight the ground and her pride at the same time. The ranch house sat low against the land, weather boards, a porch that had seen more dust than company. It wasn't welcoming, but it was solid. Right now, solid mattered. Ethan helped her inside and settled her into a chair near the window where a weak breeze still found its way through. He brought water, clean cloth, and a small tin of liniment that smelled sharp enough to sting the eyes. As he worked, he stayed quiet, giving her space to breathe through the ache without feeling watched. Emily stared at her hands. They were still shaking. "I didn't mean to slow you down," she said after a moment. I wanted to pull my weight." Ethan nodded once. Wanting that isn't a fault. He dabbed the blood from her arm, careful not to press where it hurt most. The bruise on her hip was already deep, the kind that promised long nights and stiff mornings. He'd seen that color before. It didn't scare him, but it didn't comfort him either. As he set the tin down, his eyes caught something near her boot. A thin strand of wire, finer than the fence wire, curled tight like a hook. He lifted it with 2 fingers and held it to the light. It wasn't his. Emily noticed his face change. "What is it?" she asked. He set the wire down slowly. "Nothing you did," he said. Then, after a pause, "Just proof this started before you ever got here." She didn't push. She only nodded, like she was filing the words away for later, when they might make more sense. Outside, the horse shifted, then went still. Too still. Ethan crossed to the window and moved the curtain just enough to see. Far off near the rise where the road bent toward town, a rider stood watching. Too far for a face. Close enough to be sure Ethan saw him. The rider waited, then turned and rode off slow, like there was no hurry left. The room felt colder after that. Emily followed his gaze without asking. "That normal?" she said quietly. "No," Ethan answered. "But it happens." She studied him then, the lines in his face, the way he held himself like someone used to choosing words carefully. Most men she'd known had lived on paper first. Letters. Promises written neat and hopeful. Ethan Parker felt real in a way that made hope heavier. "You don't have to fuss over me," she said. A corner of his mouth twitched. "Out here, fussing is how you stay alive." Later, when the shaking eased, Ethan hitched the wagon. The sun had started leaning west, and town would still be busy. Emily needed proper salve, not whatever he could scrape together. The ride into town stayed quiet, but not uncomfortable. The wheels creaked. Dust rose and fell behind them. Emily watched the land pass like she was memorizing it. "So this is it," she said, where the letters stopped. Ethan nodded. Words don't do much once you arrive. Town came into view slow. A few buildings. A wide street. Too many eyes pretending not to look. When they stopped, a man stepped out from the shade, clean shirt, easy smile. "Well now," said Deputy Wade Collins. "Looks like you finally brought company." Emily stiffened. Ethan stayed still. "Just supplies," Ethan said. Wade's eyes lingered on Emily a second too long. "You all right, miss?" "I took a fall," she said before Ethan could answer. Wade chuckled. "Land does that." Ethan noticed the deputy's boots. Too clean. They finished quick. Medicine. Bandages. Whispers that followed them like dust. On the way back, Emily reached into her satchel and pulled out a sealed envelope. "I was told not to give you this until I was sure," she said. "Sure of what?" Ethan asked. "That you wouldn't ask for it just because you could." He took it, but didn't open it. That night, the ranch didn't sleep easy. Wind rattled the boards. Somewhere beyond the fence, a rider passed slow enough to listen. Ethan sat at the table with the envelope in front of him and didn't touch it. Emily lay awake, hip throbbing in time with her heartbeat, realizing she hadn't come west to escape anything. She had come to choose. Before dawn, the heat had already settled into the walls like it planned to stay. Ethan was awake before the light cleared the low hills, sitting on the edge of the bed with his boots on but untied. He hadn't slept much. Worry did that. So did old habits he thought he'd buried years ago. He stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee that had gone bitter and stood there looking toward the fence line. Nothing moved. No birds lifting. No cattle shifting. That quiet bothered him more than noise ever had. Inside, Emily woke to the sound of boots on wood. Her hips screamed the moment she tried to stand. She pressed her hand against the table and breathed through it, refusing to let the pain decide the day for her. Ethan noticed anyway. He always did. "You stay put today," he said. "No fence work." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. The look on her face said she hadn't crossed half a country to be fragile, but she sat back down all the same. Ethan walked the fence alone. Not to fix it, just to read it. A fence told stories if you let it. Where it sagged, where it was pulled too tight, where hands had been that didn't belong. About 50 yards from where Emily had fallen, he found it again. The same fresh knot. The same scrape on the post. Boot prints pressed into the dirt. Not ranch boots. Hard soles. City-made. At least 3 men. He straightened and scanned the open land. No cover worth mentioning. Whoever set the trap hadn't been hiding. They'd wanted him to see it. To feel it. By mid-morning, dust rose on the road. 4 riders came into view. They didn't hurry. They rode like men who believed they had permission. Ethan waited by the fence, hands loose at his sides. "Morning," the lead rider said, tipping his hat without warmth. Ethan nodded. "Road runs past here." "You missed it." The men laughed like it was friendly. Like this was nothing. "Horse through a shoe," one of them said. "Figured we'd water up." "You should keep riding," Ethan said. The laughter stopped. One man stepped closer, just close enough to test. Ethan didn't swing wide. He stepped in sharp and fast. The man went down hard, choking on dust and surprise. The rest rushed and sloppy, all weight and noise. There was no grace to it, just balance and knowing where to put your body. Someone grabbed Ethan from behind. He drew an elbow back, felt ribs give. A heel crushed a foot. Pain shot up his shoulder where a fist caught him wrong, and his jaw clenched, but he stayed standing. From the porch, Emily watched, heart hammering. She saw one man circle wide, trying to get behind Ethan. She didn't run. Her hip burned as she grabbed a handful of gravel from a tin and flung hard. It wasn't heroic. It stung eyes. Bought seconds. That was enough. Ethan slammed the man back into the fence post, wood and wire doing the rest. The others scrambled away. Pride hurt worse than bodies. "This land won't be yours long," the lead rider spat. Ethan stepped close enough for the man to smell him. "You tell whoever sent you," he said, voice low, "that next time I won't be this patient." They rode off hard. Ethan walked the fence again once they were gone. Something lay in the dirt. A small metal clamp, bent and scuffed. Not ranch gear. Railroad issue. His stomach went cold. Emily came out slow, leaning on the doorframe. "You didn't start that," she said. "No," Ethan answered. "But it started now." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the scrap of cloth she'd taken from the wire. "One of them," she said. "The quiet one." It matched. They fixed the fence not because it would stop anyone, but because it mattered to do things right. By afternoon, the heat pressed down heavy. "You could send me back," Emily said softly. "No one would blame you." Ethan shook his head. "Trouble doesn't follow people," he said. "It waits." That night, he sat at the table with the envelope again. This time his hands moved. He slid one page out. Halfway down, one name stopped him cold. Deputy Wade Collins. Ethan didn't read the rest. He didn't need to. When a knock came before dawn, hard enough to rattle the door, he was already standing.
The second knock came faster than the first, sharp and impatient. Ethan didn't rush. He stepped toward the door steady, like a man who already knew what waited on the other side. When he opened it, Deputy Wade Collins stood on the porch with 2 men behind him. Both strangers. Both quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't polite. "Morning," Wade said, smiling like this was a social call. Ethan stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "What do you want?" Wade's eyes flicked past him toward the window. "We had a little incident last night. Figured I'd check in. Make sure everyone's safe." "Safe from what?" Ethan asked. Wade adjusted his stance. "Your guest. Town might be better for her right now." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He'd heard those words before. Years ago. Back when he still believed they meant protection. "She stays here," he said. Wade's smile thinned. "This isn't a request." He pulled out a folded paper and held it up. "Protective custody. Witness to violence. That puts her under my care." Ethan stepped closer until Wade had to tilt his head up. "You cross that line," Ethan said, calm but solid, "and you'll have to go through me." One of the men behind Wade shifted his shotgun just enough to make the message clear. Wade didn't flinch. "That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid." Behind the door, Emily listened, heart pounding. She opened it just enough to see the paper, the gun, the way Ethan's shoulders had gone still. She understood what the town would call it if blood spilled on that porch. "I'll go," she said. Both men turned. "I'll go," she repeated. "But I won't be quiet about what I've seen." Wade smiled like he'd won something small. "Of course you won't." Ethan's jaw worked. He nodded once, tight and bitter. He didn't stop them. He couldn't. Not without turning her into an excuse. They took her without touching her. Clean. Lawful. Ethan stood there long after the wagon disappeared. By midday, the town knew. They always did. They knew Ethan had fought men at his fence. They knew a young woman had been taken, for her own good. And they knew something had shifted. Ethan rode into town slow. No hurry. No gun on display. He tied his horse and walked to the post where notices went up. People watched from doorways, from behind counters, pretending not to care. He held the bent rail clamp in one hand, the scrap of cloth in the other. "This was tied wrong," he said, voice carrying without effort. "This was cut." Someone muttered it wasn't his business. "It became my business," Ethan said, when it nearly broke a young woman's hip. Silence settled in. From the far end of the street, Harold Vaughn stepped forward, well-dressed, calm, surrounded by men who didn't look nervous at all. "Ethan," Vaughn said, spreading his hands. "Land disputes happen." "Not like this," Ethan answered. "You're a smart man," Vaughn said quietly. "Smart enough to stop." Ethan didn't answer. That night, they found a rope hanging from a beam near the livery. Empty. Swaying. A warning without a body. Emily sat alone in a small room on a narrow bed, hip wrapped tight. Outside her door, Wade hummed to himself. She took out the letter and read it again. Names. Dates. Payments. Outside, the town held its breath. Ethan stood under the rope and knew the line had been crossed.
The rope was gone by morning, cut clean like it had never been there. But the feeling it left behind stayed, heavy and sour, sitting in people's chests as they went about their day, pretending nothing had changed. Ethan rode out before the sun climbed high. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. Men who explained themselves too much usually talked instead of acted. The trail toward the high ground was narrow and dry, dust puffing under his horse's hooves. His shoulder ached where a fist had caught him days before, the kind of pain that reminded him he wasn't young anymore. He welcomed it. Pain kept him honest. He reached the basin just after noon. From a distance, it looked like nothing. A shallow cut in the land, a place most people rode past without a second glance. But water pooled there, slow and stubborn, enough to keep cattle alive when the rest of the ground cracked open. And someone had claimed it. Fresh posts, wire pulled too tight, a gate that hadn't been there before. Two men stood watch, one on horseback, rifle resting easy. Another leaned in the shade of a rock, relaxed. Not nervous. That told Ethan everything. "This water doesn't belong to you," Ethan said when they noticed him. The man on the horse smiled. "It does today." Ethan didn't raise his voice. "You choke the small ranches, and the rest follows." The man shrugged. "That's business." Ethan turned his horse and rode away. No threats. No show. He'd seen enough. Halfway back, he spotted a wagon pulled off near Scrub. His stomach tightened before he even reached it. Emily sat inside, hands folded tight in her lap. Wade stood nearby, talking like they were old friends. Ethan dismounted. "You done with her?" Wade smiled. "Just keeping her safe." Emily met Ethan's eyes and gave a small nod. That was all he needed. They didn't argue. Wade waved them on like it was a courtesy. He did it because the town was watching now, and even crooked men liked daylight. They rode together in silence for a while. "You saw it," Emily said at last. "Yes." "They're taking the water." "Yes." She pressed her lips together. "Then everything else comes after." At the ranch, Ethan helped her down. Her hip still hurt, but she moved steadier now. He handed her the canteen. "You don't have to stay," he said. She drank, then handed it back. "I didn't come this far to run." That settled it. As evening came, they rode back toward the basin, not to fight, just to watch. To learn habits. A shout broke the quiet. A shot cracked the air, meant to warn. Ethan shoved Emily behind a rock and fired once, clean and controlled. The men scattered fast, cursing. Back home, Ethan cleaned his shoulder by lamplight. Emily watched him with the careful attention of someone who had seen pain before. "You always move this slow?" she asked. He smiled thin. "Only look slow." She laid the letter out on the table. "There's more here," she said. "Names that line up with a water claim." Ethan leaned back, chair creaking. "They timed it. They counted on people being tired," she said. "And scared." Outside, horses shifted. Shapes moved beyond the fence. Watching, Ethan reached for his rifle. Emily stood beside him, not behind. Something settled between them then. Not fear, not anger. Resolve. Morning came too quiet. No birds. No wind worth naming. The kind of silence that made a person feel watched, even when nothing was there. Ethan stood on the porch with his coffee cooling in his hand. Emily stepped out beside him, moving careful but upright. She didn't lean on the railing this time. That small thing mattered more than words. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. "As I'll ever be." They rode into town together, not fast, not hiding. People noticed. They always did when someone stopped trying to disappear. Doors stayed open. Conversations went thin and quiet. A few folks stepped aside like the road itself had chosen them. Ethan tied his horse in front of the general store and walked straight inside. The place smelled of flour, oil, and old wood. Men pretended to browse. Women paused mid-sentence. Everyone listened. He set the letter down on the counter, flattened it with his palm so it couldn't curl away. Names, dates, amounts written plain, like someone keeping track of feed or rent. "This is what's been happening," Ethan said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Quiet, clean, paid for. Someone scoffed. "That don't prove." Emily stepped forward. She placed the rail clamp beside the letter. Then the scrap of cloth. Dark, heavy. She held it up just as Deputy Wade Collins walked through the door. The room shifted. Wade smiled like he always did. Easy, confident. "Morning," he said. Emily didn't look away from him. She lifted her hand and brushed her fingers against his coat sleeve. Same color, same weave. No one needed it explained. Wade laughed once, sharp. "This is nonsense." The store owner moved without thinking, stepping between Wade and the counter. Not brave, just tired. Outside, boots hit the boardwalk hard. Vaughn's men were coming. Fast, angry. Someone smashed a bottle, and the sharp smell of oil rolled in. Ethan didn't draw his gun. He shifted his stance, and the room felt it. People always knew when a man stopped bluffing. Before anyone could speak, another voice cut through the noise. "Calm, flat. That'll be enough." A U.S. Marshal stepped in from the street, badge plain, eyes steady. He'd been watching this town all week, same as the rumors said. When one of Vaughn's men lifted a rifle outside, a single shot cracked clean. The rifle hit the dirt. No blood, just a lesson. By sundown, the water gate was opened. Not by one hero, but by a few men who decided they were done being afraid. The water ran again, slow and honest. That night, people stayed out longer than usual. Talked low, laughed a little. Back at the ranch, Ethan and Emily fixed the fence where she'd fallen. They pulled the wire just right. Not careless, not cruel. "I think this is where it started," she said. "And where it ends," Ethan answered. They stood there watching the sun drop, the land breathing easier. That night, the house felt different. Not full, just right. The quiet didn't leave all at once. It loosened slowly, like a fist learning to unclench. Even after the water was opened and the town pretended to breathe again, sleep didn't come easy. Ethan lay awake with the lamp low, listening to the house settle. Wood creaked. Wind brushed the porch. Every sound felt louder when a man had spent too long expecting the wrong one. He had promised himself years ago he wouldn't live like this again, half-dressed, boots within reach. Promises were easier when the world stayed kind. Across the hall, Emily stared at the ceiling, her hip throbbing dull and steady. Pain had a way of slowing thoughts, of making space for things you'd avoided. She thought about the letter she had carried so far, folded and refolded until the paper softened. She thought about how close she'd come to being quiet just to keep peace. Near morning, Ethan sat at the table again with a letter. This time he read it all. Not fast, not angry, just careful. Each name landed like a weight. He recognized more than he wanted to. Men he'd nodded to in town. Men who'd asked after his cattle like it was friendly talk. When the sun finally came up, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like a question. Emily joined him, moving slower than usual, but steady. She poured coffee without asking, the way people did once they decided they belonged somewhere. They won't stop because they lost once, she said. Ethan nodded. No, they stop when it costs more than it pays. And now it cost them daylight. They didn't hide that day. Ethan rode the line with other ranchers, men who had kept quiet too long and were tired of it. No speeches, no promises, just presence. Fences got checked. Water got counted. Eyes met without looking away. In town, people talked, some with relief, some with bitterness. Fear didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It stopped being lonely. By afternoon, a wagon came up the road carrying news. Vaughn had packed up. Wade was gone before sundown, badge left behind like something dropped by accident. No parade followed, just a slow understanding that some doors stayed shut once you walked through them. That evening, Ethan and Emily sat on the porch, watching heat lift off the land. She rested her hand against the railing, not for balance, just comfort. I thought coming west would make things simpler, she said. Turns out it just made them honest. Ethan considered that. Honest's usually harder. She smiled faintly. But better. He looked at her then, really looked. Not as someone who needed protecting. As someone who had chosen where to stand. You could still leave, he said. Nothing tying you here but work and dust. Emily shook her head. I didn't come to borrow a life. I came to build one. That night, the wind came soft. No riders passed the fence. No shadows tested the dark. For the first time in weeks, Ethan slept without listening for trouble. And when he woke, he didn't feel younger. He felt clearer.
Morning came gentle, like the land itself had decided to give them a break. The heat still waited, but it held back for a while, letting the air stay cool enough to breathe. Ethan stood at the fence with a coil of wire in his hands, not fixing anything that was broken, just tending to what mattered. Emily joined him a few minutes later. Her step still carried a trace of pain, but it no longer defined how she moved. She handed him a staple without speaking, and he took it the same way. Quiet work had its own language. They finished the line and stood there, looking out over the open stretch where the water now ran clean again. Cattle moved slow and steady. Nothing rushed. Nothing hid. For a long time, Ethan said, I thought keeping my head down was the same as keeping the peace. Emily leaned against the post, careful but unafraid. It usually feels that way, she said. Until it doesn't. He nodded. Trouble didn't start when they came after the land. It started when people learned they could do it without being named. She thought about that. About how close she'd come to staying quiet because it felt safer. I used to believe strength meant pushing through alone, she said. Now I think it's deciding when not to. They watched the fence a while longer. Not as a boundary, but as something that needed care to stay honest. Too loose and it failed. Too tight and it hurt someone who didn't deserve it. By midday, neighbors passed by. Some waved. Some stopped to talk. No speeches. No apologies. Just the slow work of mending trust the same way you mended land. One small decision at a time. That afternoon, Emily sat at the table and wrote a letter of her own. Not to explain what had happened. Not to accuse. Just to say where she stood and why. When she finished, she folded it once and set it aside. The words felt lighter now that they weren't carrying fear. Ethan watched her and felt something settle that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying for years. He hadn't won because he was stronger or louder. He'd won because he'd finally refused to lie to himself about what mattered. As the sun dropped, they sat on the porch together. No rush. No need to fill the quiet. Funny thing, Emily said softly. I thought coming west would give me distance from who I was. And? Ethan asked. It showed me who I needed to be. Ethan smiled, just a little. He was 57 years old, with scars that didn't fade and regrets that still visited sometimes. But that evening, he felt something close to peace. Not the kind that comes from avoiding trouble, but the kind that comes from facing it and choosing better anyway. The truth, he knew now, wasn't loud. It didn't need permission. It waited for someone willing to stand where it could be seen. Most people don't wake up wanting to be brave. They wake up wanting a quiet day and a fair chance. But life has a way of testing the lines we draw and the ones we allow others to cross. In the end, character mattered more than comfort. Silence could look like safety, but it practiced surrender. And courage didn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it meant speaking, sometimes it meant staying, and sometimes it meant refusing to look away. The land didn't change because the world turned kind. It changed because a few people decided they were done being afraid. And that choice, made plain and steady, was enough to hold.